We do not scare easily. We never bow. We never bend. We never break. We are America, second to none, and we own the finish line.
Every few months, a small country suddenly appears in the news. Not because it started a war or did something shocking, but because big powers are fighting over it. You see it in headlines, one side giving money, another side sending weapons, and the people of that small country are left in the middle, trying to survive. It's like two giants pulling on a rope, and the rope is the small nation that gets torn apart in the process. This happens again and again in different parts of the world, in different ways. Some countries are used for their location, others for their resources, and some just because they stand between two rivals. In this video, we're going to talk about why this keeps happening. Why small nations become tools in the bigger game of global powers, how it starts, what it looks like today, and if there's any way for them to break free from it. Before we go deeper, let's understand what people really mean when they talk about great power games. In our world, there are a few countries that hold most of the global power: the United States, China, Russia, and parts of the European Union. These nations have strong economies, big militaries, and global influence. They shape international politics, make the biggest deals, and often decide how the world moves. Then, there are small nations, countries like Sri Lanka, Ukraine, Ghana, or Fiji. They may have small populations, limited military strength, or developing economies. But many of them sit in important places on the world map, close to oceans, trade routes, or regions rich in resources. That's what makes them valuable to the bigger powers. Now, what are power games? It's not just about fighting wars. Power games are about competition: who can gain more control, who can win more friends, who can shape the world in their favor. Big powers don't always fight directly. Instead, they compete by giving aid, building alliances, funding projects, or supporting certain governments. You can imagine it like a chessboard. The kings and queens are the great powers, planning every move carefully. But the pawns, the small countries, are often moved around to protect those larger interests. And sometimes, when two big players clash, it's the pawns that get crushed in between. This isn't a new thing. It's been happening for decades, just in different forms, from open wars in the past to political and economic struggles today. When we talk about small nations being used by great powers, it's not a new story. It has been happening for decades, just in different forms. If we go back in time, history gives us some clear examples of how powerful countries turn smaller ones into tools for their own interests. Let's start with the Cold War, the tense period that began right after World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union both wanted to prove they were stronger, but neither could afford a direct war. A nuclear clash would have destroyed the world. So instead, they fought their battles in other people's countries. Korea was one of the first. The nation was split, north supported by the Soviet Union and China, and the south backed by the United States. What began as a local conflict soon became an international war. The result? Millions of ordinary Koreans suffered, while the two superpowers used the country as a testing ground for their influence. Then came Vietnam. Once again, it was a small country divided by ideology. The North received weapons and support from the Soviet Union and China, while the South relied on American military power. For over a decade, Vietnam became the center of a global struggle, not because of its own choices, but because of the rivalry between great powers. Villages were destroyed, cities bombed, and generations traumatized, all in the name of proving who had more control. Afghanistan faced a similar fate years later. When the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, the United States saw a chance to weaken its rival. So, it started funding and training local fighters known as the Mujahideen. The Soviets eventually left, but the country never recovered. What was left behind was chaos, broken lives, and decades of instability. There's an old African saying that says, when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. During the Cold War, small nations were that grass. They weren't just victims of war, they were victims of politics, used to show dominance in a global chess game. But this pattern didn't start with the Cold War. The roots go even deeper, back to colonial times. For centuries, powerful empires like Britain, France, and Portugal ruled large parts of Africa and Asia. They drew borders, built governments, and set up economies that served their own interests. When these colonies finally gained independence, they inherited weak economies, artificial borders, and a deep reliance on their former rulers. Many new governments didn't have industries or strong institutions, so they had to depend on foreign aid, trade, and military help. In Africa, countries like Ghana or Kenya struggled to break free from the economic grip of Europe. In South Asia, newly independent nations like Pakistan and Sri Lanka faced poverty and debt while still following systems set up by their colonizers. In many ways, independence came with invisible chains, less visible than before, but just as powerful. And then there's the Middle East, a region that continues to show how small nations can become battlegrounds for others' ambitions. In Syria, for example, local protests turned into a full-scale war because foreign powers took sides, the US, Russia, Iran, Turkey, each supporting their preferred group. The same happened in Yemen, where regional and international powers backed rival forces, leaving millions starving and displaced. These countries didn't start these wars to gain global power. They were simply caught in the middle, valuable because of their oil, their geography, or their alliances. For them, survival often meant choosing sides even when neither side truly cared about their future. You might think all this belongs to the past, that such manipulation ended with the Cold War or the fall of colonial empires. But the truth is, the game never really ended. It only changed shape. In today's world, the game of power hasn't disappeared, it's just evolved. Small nations still find themselves caught between giants, not always by choice, but often because of where they are or what they have. Let's look at 3 recent examples that show how this plays out. The Pacific Islands are beautiful, peaceful places, but their location makes them strategically important. In recent years, China has been offering these small nations deals for infrastructure and security. For instance, in 2022, China signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands. This agreement raised concerns among Western countries like the United States and Australia, who saw it as China's growing influence in the region. In response, these Western nations have been strengthening their own ties with Pacific countries, offering aid and security partnerships. The Pacific Islands, however, just want development and security for their people. Yet, they often find themselves in the middle of a tug-of-war between these great powers. China's Belt and Road Initiative is an ambitious plan to build infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and beyond. In Africa, many countries have welcomed this investment, seeing it as an opportunity for development. However, some nations have found themselves in debt after taking large loans for projects. For example, Sri Lanka struggled to repay loans for a port built with Chinese investment and had to lease the port to China for 99 years. Similarly, Zambia faced challenges with debt repayment. Some experts refer to this as debt trap diplomacy, while others argue it's a result of poor planning. Regardless, these small nations often lose their freedom to make independent choices. Ukraine's location between Russia and NATO countries has made it a focal point in the struggle for influence. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and since then, Ukraine has been in conflict with Russian-backed separatists in the eastern regions. The West, led by NATO, has supported Ukraine with military aid and sanctions against Russia. Ukraine desires independence and closer ties with the West, but its geography and history make it a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. Ordinary Ukrainians bear the brunt of this conflict, facing displacement, economic hardship, and loss. These examples show that the dynamics of power games have shifted but not disappeared. Small nations continue to navigate a complex landscape, trying to secure their future while being pulled in different directions by larger powers. In today's world, control doesn't always come with soldiers. Sometimes, it comes with contracts and hashtags. Great powers have developed subtle ways to influence smaller nations, often without the need for direct confrontation. Let's explore these hidden tools of control. Military alliances are agreements where powerful countries promise protection to smaller nations. In return, these smaller nations often have to align their policies with the interests of the stronger ally. For instance, NATO members are expected to support each other in times of conflict. While these alliances provide security, they can also limit the sovereignty of smaller nations, making them dependent on the decisions and interests of their more powerful allies. Economic aid from powerful countries can be a double-edged sword. On the surface, it appears as assistance to help developing nations grow. However, these aids often come with conditions that can lead to long-term dependence. Loans and grants may be tied to agreements that favor the donor country, such as access to resources or markets. This economic dependence can restrict the recipient nation's ability to make independent decisions, as they may prioritize the interests of the donor to maintain the flow of aid. Great powers often support political leaders or parties in smaller nations that align with their interests. This support can come in various forms, such as financial aid, diplomatic backing, or public endorsements. While this support can help maintain stability, it can also undermine democratic processes by promoting leaders who serve the interests of foreign powers rather than their own people. This political influence can steer the nation's policies in directions that may not reflect the will of its citizens. In the digital age, controlling information is a powerful tool. Great powers use media and cultural exports to shape narratives and influence public opinion in smaller nations. Through movies, news outlets, and social media, they can promote values and ideologies that align with their interests. This form of soft power can subtly alter perceptions and behaviors, making smaller nations more receptive to the agendas of more powerful countries. These hidden tools of control are not always visible but are deeply embedded in the interactions between great and small nations. They illustrate how power dynamics are maintained and how smaller nations can find themselves constrained by forces beyond their control. Small nations often find themselves at a crossroads, where the choices are limited and the stakes are high. Their decisions are shaped by vulnerabilities and strategic calculations, not just desires. Many small nations grapple with limited resources, weak military capabilities, and pressing needs for development and security. For instance, consider a small island nation confronting rising sea levels. When a powerful country offers to build essential infrastructure, the temptation to accept is strong. The offer promises immediate relief and long-term benefits. Refusing might mean missing out on crucial development opportunities, leaving the nation even more vulnerable. Some small nations adopt a strategy known as hedging, where they maintain relationships with multiple powerful countries to avoid over-reliance on any single one. Countries like Singapore, Qatar, and Finland exemplify this approach. They engage with various global powers, balancing their interests to safeguard their sovereignty and economic well-being. This strategy allows them to navigate the complexities of international politics while striving to maintain independence. These examples illustrate the difficult choices small nations face in a world dominated by powerful countries. Their decisions are often not about preference but about survival and strategic positioning. While it may seem that small nations are always at the mercy of larger powers, many are finding ways to carve out their own path. Through strategic choices and collective efforts, they're learning to navigate the complexities of global politics. One effective strategy is diversifying partnerships. By building relationships with multiple countries, small nations can avoid over-reliance on any single power. This approach provides them with more options and reduces the risk of being manipulated or coerced. For example, countries like Singapore and Qatar have successfully engaged with various global powers, balancing their interests to maintain sovereignty and security. Regional alliances also play a crucial role. Organizations like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the African Union, AU, offer platforms for small nations to collaborate on economic, political, and security issues. These alliances strengthen their collective bargaining power and provide a united front in international negotiations. ASEAN, for instance, has been instrumental in promoting economic cooperation and regional stability among its member states. Investing in education and technology is another key factor. By developing a skilled workforce and embracing technological advancements, small nations can enhance their economic competitiveness and reduce dependency on external powers. Initiatives like the African Union's Digital Education Plan aim to provide high-quality, localized learning resources to every African learner by 2030, fostering innovation and self-reliance. Ultimately, the strength of a nation lies within. By focusing on good governance, economic development, and social cohesion, small nations can create a solid foundation that supports their independence. As the saying goes, the smaller a nation is, the smarter it must be. Through resilience and strategic thinking, small nations can navigate the complexities of global politics and secure a future where they are not merely pawns in the game. We've journeyed through decades of history, from the tense standoffs of the Cold War to the complex power plays of today. We've seen how small nations, whether in Asia, Africa, or the Pacific, often pay the price of bigger countries' ambitions. Wars, debts, political pressures, and media influence, these are the challenges they face when caught in the crossfire of global power struggles. Yet, there is hope. History also shows that even pawns can change the game. With awareness, unity, and courage, small nations can assert their independence and make choices that protect their people and their future. Strategic partnerships, regional alliances, investment in education, and strong governance are all tools that can turn vulnerability into strength. And for us watching from afar, there is a lesson too. Understanding how power works is the first step toward making sense of world events and supporting nations that are striving to stand on their own. If this story opened your eyes to the realities of global politics, share it. Every conversation about power, influence, and independence brings us closer to a world where small nations are no longer just pawns on a chessboard but players in their own right.